afternoon all. Welcome to our webinar. We're a little bit early, so we'll wait for a couple of more people joining us who are logging in. Just for people that have joined us, welcome. You can come and say hello in the question and answer box of this webinar, and it would be good if people come and say hello, and especially if you can see and hear me, just checking that everything's in working order before we start. So if you just come and say hello in the question and answer, and just let me know that you can hear and see me okay before we start. Oh, hi, I see Wendy from St John's Primary School is here, and hopefully, Wendy, that means you can hear me as well. If anybody else, yeah. Charlene from Staffordshire Christchurch is in it. Tracy can hear me loud and clear. Hi, Tracy, nice to know you in here. Can't wait to see you again. Natasha's here, brilliant. So people can hear me and a few more people have joined us. So it's 2 o'clock. We'll start with our third Walsall Right for Children webinar. We've been doing a couple of these webinars with the aim to kind of reflect on services we can provide in the light of COVID-19, social distancing and lockdown. And following the webinar we did on domestic abuse, we felt it was really important to reflect on how we will offer support in the future coming out of lockdown, and the reflecting on the experience we all have had, working in a different way, living in a different way, and then maybe some of the trauma we have experienced attached to that, but also what does that mean for children and families we are supporting, and what does that mean in how we deliver services now and when we come out of lockdown, very slowly, but we will come out of lockdown and we will be delivering face-to-face sessions. What does that mean for our services? So we felt it was really important to take a little bit of time out to start thinking of what trauma-informed practice might look like. What does it mean to deliver trauma-informed practice? And that's what we want to do in the next 60 minutes, is reflect on what it means, reflect on what that means for me as a practitioner working in Walsall, and what does that mean for me as an organisation, and hopefully provide some very practical help and support and some information that will help you on that journey, and that will start that journey together, because this is also about us working together and making sure we're all working together to deliver the best service possible to children in Walsall. So I will not be talking much. We'll be joined today by four kind of experts in that area, and kind of people who are delivering some real practical information and advice in Walsall. So we'll be joined by Julie Jones, our Group Manager for Early Help, and Emma Thornbury, who is the Service Manager for our Education Psychologist service. We'll also be joined by Dr. Rebecca Johnson, who is a Development Manager for the Solihull approach, and she's a consultant clinician psychologist as well. The Solihull approach is an offer that we have available free of charge to parents, but also an offer to practitioners as well in terms of the training around trauma-informed practice. So she will be telling us much more about that and how you can access it. And then we'll also be joined by Mark Finnis, who's the Director for L30. We've in Walsall worked with Mark for a number of years around relationship-based practice, and Mark will give us some of the principles around relationship-based practice and why it's always important, but why it's really key in this kind of context. And then we'll also cover what's available now in terms of the early help offer and support, and some key contacts and information that is available to you. We'll also be covering any questions or any reflection that you have, and for people who haven't joined us before, you can do that using the questions and answers. We'll be covering the questions and answers at the end of the session. So we make sure that we kind of get the themes out of it, and we respond to all your questions you may have. So we'll do that at the end of the session, but please put them in the comment box and I will pick them up. Also really important, as soon as this webinar is finished, we'll be sending you the PowerPoint presentation with all the information attached to it, as well as some additional information about a number of things that have been covered by the presenter. So no need for you to make notes of what's on the PowerPoint, because you will get that today following this webinar. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Julie Jones, who's our early help manager, and who will be reflecting a little bit about consultation we've done with practitioners, children and young people and parents, and kind of the thinking, the feelings that they have. Welcome, Julie.
Hi everybody, hope you can hear me. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes really to set the scene before I hand over to some colleagues to give you a little bit more detail. So Kerry, can I just have the first slide, please? So just setting the scene from an early help perspective, we know absolutely that lockdown has been challenging to us all, and I think that's a crucial thing that we need to remember, that we've all experienced levels of anxiety, some loss and some trauma, and it's important to be mindful of that. But we also know for the families that we're supporting that the family dynamics have shifted and have some change. Some have absolutely strengthened, and there's been some positives that have come out of this, but also we know that conflict has increased quite considerably, and we need to be mindful and understand and look at that really. We also know that we're able to support emotionally and practically to our children and young people, but to be able to do that, we need to have practitioners that are emotionally available, that are confident and resilient. And I think that's where we've been starting to think about the support and how we work with our colleagues, with each other, and how we support each other through that. As I say, we know that some of our children and young people have experienced this. There's lots of tensions, lots of conflict going out there, and we know that they bring in some mechanisms and some strategies to manage that, but we absolutely know that they are only short-term strategies. They can't be sustained for a long time, so we need to think about the behaviours that we might start to see and how they might manifest over the next few months, and really look behind what's behind those behaviours. Just to set a little bit of a scene, so over the last year for early help, we know that 34% of all of our referrals that we've received have been a combination, and the two highest parts are around children's behaviour and domestic abuse. We know that they're linked very much, but children's behaviour referrals has been the main reason that we have referrals into our service. We're currently supporting over 800 children and young people and their families across the borough, and we within our service are starting to think about how do we prep for post-lockdown. We're in touch with families on a daily basis, of course we are, but we think that we need to take a step back, take some time to reflect and reconnect, and time to talk and reconnect those relationships, and absolutely critical. And we know absolutely we need to do this together. We can't do this on our own. We are worried within our service that we might have a flood of referrals. You know, we've already got 800 children that we really need to focus on when we come out of post-lockdown. So it's about how do we prep together around that. Next slide, please. So we've gone out and we've done a bit of consultation. We do this constantly with some practitioners, with our families, with our parents and our children and young people. There are some positives, as I've said, that have come out of this lockdown. There's a common thread around opportunities, about some well-being positives being seen, but there's an absolute common thread around anxiety and isolation. So from our practitioners, you'll see, and you'll get these slides, but the positives have been that they feel that it's provided in the challenging times, but it's provided opportunities to build the teams, to strengthen the teams, to support each other. You know, positive way of working, creative ways of working and supporting each other and supporting our children and young people. But absolutely, they're concerned about what will life look like post-lockdown. You know, am I able and ready to support? I've been through a lot myself. You know, it's important to help each other in these emotional times. Difficult to get that home work-life balance. So all of these things, you know, as a leader in early help, I need absolutely to think about and encourage others to think about how do we support that going forward. Next slide, please. Parents have been telling us again some of the positives. It was interesting. One of our families who've got 7 children have said that absolutely they've seen in this that the siblings have become more friends, not enemies and fighting constantly. They've actually built on their friendship. I was reading an article the other day that one of our young people who had some substance misuse issues, we managed to get some very dedicated support from the Beacon for this young person, and actually the substance misuse has almost disappeared. So, you know, critical that's been a real positive, but critically we support that going forward when all of those things are outside and available to that young person, that we keep that positivity going. There's lots of concerns around parents. You know, parents are saying that they feel they're the peacemaker, sorry, within their home, that they feel like they're treading on eggshells constantly, are embarrassed and reluctant to ask for help. They feel that they're not coping. They see other parents and they feel that other parents are coping better than them. You know, that's a real anxiety for them. But they've also said that the levels of support that early help have given them, they don't want that to go away. You know, we've been in touch with parents far more than we would have in our normal everyday life, and actually that's been a critical learning point for us. I think it's not just about the interactive and sessions that you hold with parents. It's just about taking that time out, giving them some time, listening to them, and giving them that time to tell you how they're feeling and have a normal conversation. Next slide, please. For our children and young people, I've just said about the young man with the drug use and you know, the positive that his mom has talked about, the impact that that's had on a whole family. You know, other children have said that they've had fun with their parents, that it's been great. I laugh a lot now with mom. I suppose that's been given more time for them to do that. But others have said that, you know, goes without saying, that they're missing their friends, but they're worried in some circumstances about going back to school, leaving mom. What will life look like? What will it feel like? Some are saying, I can't really tell you how I'm feeling. I don't know how I'm feeling, but I feel sad, but I can't talk to you and tell you exactly why. So it's important for us to prep to allow them to have that space. They're saying that that they don't feel that they're seen. They're spending lots of time in their bedrooms, locked away. So there's a lots of mixed emotions and anxieties, as well as the positives that are coming from children and young people that we need to be mindful of. And final slide, please. So what do we know? As I've said about the positives, some relationships at home have absolutely improved. Some are feeling less stressed, particularly where there's anxiety around attending school for some of our older young people. But we need to prepare for the challenges, and that's what today is about, and how we start to think about this. And we all need to do this together. Absolutely, we need to understand what's behind the behaviours that, as I've said, we know will manifest in a variety of different ways over the coming months. And I think that's from us all, you know, accepting that's not just the children and the young people and the families that we support. That's important for us all. But we need to absolutely take the opportunities that this gives us, build on our relationships and our support networks that we've got, and tackle this and support each other in the future. I'm now going to pass you over to Rebecca, my colleague, who's going to talk to you about the Solihull approach.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me okay? I hope you can. It's an honour to join this webinar. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm Rebecca, and I'm a clinical psychologist with my clinical experience in child and adolescent mental health, but I've also been involved with the Solihull approach since 2001, and I now work full-time with them. I'm aware that although the Solihull approach 2-day foundation training has been cascaded throughout Walsall for many years, some of you won't know the Solihull approach, so I apologise if I'm using terminology that's unfamiliar. I'm hoping that for those of you who have done the training in the past, this will just be a reminder of some of the principles, but even those of you who haven't done the training, I hope that you'll get some useful key messages from this short presentation. I think Can you move it on, Kerry? Thanks. Yeah, brilliant. The Solihull approach, is just worth saying, is not a technique as such. It's a process. It's a theoretical framework that can support the process by which you work with families, whether you're from any agency, as long as you're working with relationships. It's a useful way of thinking about the process by which you deliver strategies, techniques, that kind of thing. So let's go. I mean, I guess the thing that I wanted us to think about is that when we're thinking about supporting families at the moment, it's important to remember that whilst these are and have been rather extraordinary times, people's responses to it are going to be within the range of normal human emotion, and we therefore have the skills. You have the skills already to help people with their emotional experiences. So it's a question of just remembering, let's go back to basics. So how do we support people emotionally and behaviourally? Well, one of the key messages here is about seeing behaviour as a form of communication. So I noticed when Julie talked about referrals for behaviour, that challenging behaviour, whilst it presents a problem in a, say, classroom setting, is actually really valuable communication, especially in a child where they won't obviously have the language to necessarily communicate how they're feeling. So it's really worth just holding on to that idea that, oh yeah, I've got to deal with this situation right now, this child who's kicking off or who's withdrawn and not engaging, not complying. But let's try and hold on to the idea that behind that behaviour, there's an emotional experience being conveyed, telling you something about the child's emotional world. And I suppose even in circumstances where children or families or colleagues are feeling traumatised, the key thing to remember about this, and the one thing that all definitions of trauma tend to have in common, is that they're defined by a person's capacity to cope with their emotions, being overwhelmed, their ordinary emotional regulation skills of overwhelmed, whether that's by a car accident or repeated stresses within the house or this current situation. So it's not necessarily about referring them to specialist services, but thinking about what skills we need to help support them to be able to feel less overwhelmed by their full up feelings. How do we help to restore the capacity to think? Because if we're overwhelmed, we can't engage the parts of our brain that we need to think clearly. And actually, the relationships that people have with available and local trusted people, figures, can be immensely far more therapeutic than even weekly, 1 hour a week with a therapist, even though that in itself is a very rare offer. But even if you can get that, it's those day-to-day interactions that can end up being far more therapeutic. So the key message here is it is all about relationships, and if that isn't clear, it's about relationships. And hey, relationships, just to hammer that point home, really. Thanks, Kerry. So if we start with the first part of the Solihull approach, triangle, and we generally go from this part to reciprocity to behaviour management. Containment is both a really complex psychodynamic theory, and it's a really straightforward experience that most people, if they're lucky enough, will experience from day to day. And and offer people day to day as well. So the definition of this is where containment is where a person receives and understands the emotional communication of another without being overwhelmed by it, crucially, and communicates this back to the other person. So what happens is, as you can see in that slide, if somebody has the opportunity, they're feeling overwhelmed, to talk to another person, feel really heard and listened and validated, and then they have the capacity to think about what it is that they're experiencing, and they can receive those feelings back, and that restores the capacity to think more clearly. So what that feels like is that you're with somebody, they're feeling overwhelmed, you take in the quality of that feeling that you're sensing from them, either from what they say or from what they don't say, and how you end up, you might end up feeling some of what they're feeling too. You hold on to it, you process it a bit, you show them that this feeling can be thought about, it can be tolerated at a time when maybe they're not feeling it's tolerable. And this allows the person to think, oh, maybe it can be subconsciously, maybe this can be born, and I can maybe take things back into myself. So I don't know if you've ever had a bad day yourself where you're just full up of all the things you've had to do at work, somebody's been critical, you've got the washing up still to do from this morning, you're worried about your finances and being overdrawn, and the car still needs an MOT, and you know, we've all had, as human beings, we've all had those days. And just want you to think about who you would go to in that moment when you're feeling like that. It's likely to be somebody who listens and who just hears what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily tell you what to do about all of the things on your to-do list, but just by talking to them, you somehow feel better. They haven't taken any jobs off you, but you feel that things are back in perspective, and you can either resolve those things for yourself, or you'll be more receptive to taking on suggestions that the other person makes. As long as you feel heard and validated and understood, you'll be feeling that sense of containment. And it's really important to say that containment is not about just absorbing somebody else's emotions. It's not about them, you know, being a sponge and just people dumping their feelings on you. It's about hearing them and helping them to make sense of them, and helping them to step back and make sense of how they're feeling. So I suspect that you're already using many of these skills that will help lead to a sense of containment, and it's a really important skill for this time. Okay, thanks, Kerry. So reciprocity is the next kind of idea that we introduce in the Solihull approach, and it describes a pattern that occurs naturally in all healthy relationships. So the key thing for today is to pay attention to the fact that we're reading cues when we interact with people, whether we're doing that face to face or via digital connection, via the telephone. We're picking up on verbal and non-verbal cues. Obviously it's difficult on the telephone, non-verbals, but you can definitely hear between the lines. And I guess the thing that I think about here is that we would rarely tell somebody something quite intimate and close, even our trusted friends, allies, how we feel straight away. There's always a bit of an initiation and an engagement process to start with. And that's really important to think about as we're supporting families and children in particular in school. So it might be that their initiation signals, that the signs, the cues that they're giving out, that they're ready to have a conversation with you, maybe nothing to do with the thing that you think is bothering them. So they might come and a child might just come and stand near you, or they might talk to you about something else, but they've started a conversation, and kids may not even know that they want to talk about how they're feeling, but if you're responding to their signals that tell you that they want to engage with you in some way and make space, then the conversation may unfold, and that may lead to you being able to support them with their emotional experience. So to give you an example, prison officers who understood about this concept, who just learnt about this concept, were more tolerant of prisoners coming up to them and sort of engaging in chit chat, kind of just that small talk, because they recognised this was part of the kind of initiation and orientation and state of attention in the reciprocity curve. And they were then, these conversations led to more connected relationships and disclosures from the prisoners about how they really were. And can you click on to the next one then? Yeah, so it might be that you need to use your turn in an interaction to increase the speed, or to reflect back the pace of the interaction, the temperature of it. So somebody might be kind of highly agitated, because we're talking about a sort of arousal curve here, I guess. Someone might be highly agitated, and so it might be that you need to become more aroused in response to them to help them feel attuned with you, and then use your turn in the interaction to slow the conversation down and bring the arousal levels down, for an example. And it's also really important to think about how interactions end. So how do people feel as they disengage from you? And this could be just simple as saying, well, what are you going to do now? What have you got planned for later on? You know, helping people and children make the transition from one activity to another. And I think this is really important on virtual contacts. You know, if you're speaking to people via video links in any way, to not just end a meeting suddenly for everybody, but to let people drift away and just have the equivalent of that, you know, putting coats on and disengaging, saying goodbye. And then the other thing to remember is that this pattern is a pattern over time, not just for the immediate interaction. So we might take a few goes of having a conversation with a family before they start to feel that, yeah, you are going to be here and available and somebody I could rely on and maybe open up to. And then the other key idea about reciprocity is that not every interaction has to follow this perfect dance through these steps. And in fact, we know, don't we, that infants who are learning and wiring, particularly whilst their brains are developing, wiring up their neural pathways, need a bit of experience of rupture to the interaction, as long as it's followed by repair and isn't ruptured repeatedly over time. That's very detrimental. But if rupture with repair happens, then that builds resilience, and that's going to be the case as well. At the moment, we won't always get things right for families, but it's our willingness to step back in and say sorry, or to just re-engage with people if we feel that we've lost them. I think Mark's going to talk a bit more about that later as well, operationalising that for us. So yeah, Kerry, could we move to the next slide? Thank you. So behaviour management refers to really anything that we do with families, any strategies, techniques, our own behaviour as well. And how we would fit this into the Solihull approach model is that you're going to be much more effective if you've taken the time to really listen, to read those cues and understand what this person's trying to say to us. We will then customise the strategies to both the situation and our understanding of the story. We'll have heard their story, their experience. So yeah, thank you, Kerry. So we talk in the Solihull approach about the parallel process, and I really think this is important at this point, because as Julie said, you know, everybody is in a slightly surreal and strange situation. All of us will have been potentially exposed to the stresses and the strains. Can you just click for me, Kerry? There's an idea about some of the things that people are facing and are concerned about. And restoring the capacity to think is a lot like borrowing someone else's headspace when you're full and sort of sharing the bandwidth. So what we know is that children and infants need somebody to have some available headspace to help them process their emotional experience, because that's how they learn to internalize that skill and be able to regulate and manage their behavior over time as they grow up. So if the person who's supporting them, i.e. their parents, their carers, family members, if their head is becoming full with all these other things, then that person needs a supportive other, whether that's a partner or a peer or a worker who has some available headspace, so that they can then go back and think about the child's, reflect on the child's experience. But as workers, we also get full heads, if you like. So we need support. We need managers and supervisors and peers and friends and family to help us to have some of that containment, restore our capacity to think. And one of the ideas in the Solihull approach is that the further away from the sort of overwhelming, potentially toxic feelings that we get, the more bearable they are to hear about. And I suppose this is highly relevant when we're talking about trauma. So that if we pass those emotions through the system, then hopefully they at some level can be thought about and borne. And the end result is that the child will have access to available headspace. So this is really important, because it might be that the best thing you can do, especially if there are managers in the audience, or people from senior leadership teams, or people offering support and supervision to others, is to think about how you support staff. That might be your most effective way of supporting children and families. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So thanks to a funded multi-user license, all residents in Walsall can access some of these ideas through some online courses. And these are courses, I should say, for absolutely everyone, for all parents and carers and grandparents. And they're non-prescriptive. We don't tell parents how to parent, but we give them access to these key ideas about supporting children's emotional regulations and managing our own emotions as well. So the way that you would, there are these flyers, there's one for each of the 4 courses you can see there. There's antenatal, which is really important at the moment. Obviously antenatal education is on hold in a face-to-face format, but this is a full antenatal course with examples of supporting infants' emotional experience as well. There's a postnatal course, the full course, which is for everybody, and then there's a short course, a sort of sample course, if you like, on the teenager's brain. So if you could go to the next slide, I think the flyers and the codes are going to be circulated to everybody if they haven't been already. So this is just a screenshot from the website. So you would go to inourplace.co.uk, and where it says, there's that big green button, buy course or apply code, and you would click that button and it would take you to this orange box on a page, and you would enter the relevant access code there. There's one access code for each of the courses, but all parents would use the same access code, and that will bring up a Walsall specific registration page. And just worth noting as well that so the courses are available in some other languages, but the splash page, the home page, if you like, there's a Google Translate button on it there, so that's just worth flagging up as well. And finally, thanks, Gary. I just want to, I suppose, flag up another free resource for you, which is our online course for professionals. So this works in the same way as the parents course. There's a slightly different route into it. So your account in Our Place needs to recognise you as a professional, and there's a system for that. And we're circulating a how-to guide, and this postcard has lots of useful information as well. So this is takes about 4 hours to complete, we think, 4 hours of CPD time, but you can do it. You can either do it in one sitting, or you can do it in bite-sized chunks because it's organised into different modules. Once you've accessed it using this code, you'll have it indefinitely in your account, and it covers things like the two different types of trauma, from type 1, which is kind of your big single events, to type 2, which is more around relational trauma. So there's the repeated small experiences of being ignored or having your emotional needs unmet that build up to post-traumatic stress disorder. One key idea that I found really helpful is the window of tolerance. So I highly recommend this course. I think it's really relevant for this time, although it wasn't designed for this time specifically. It is an advanced course from the Solihull approach. So it assumes you've done the 2-day foundation course, but it's not essential, and you will still get a lot out of it even if you haven't done that, I think, and it will introduce you to the ideas that I've talked about today in a bit more detail as well. So I think that's everything from me. I'll hand over to Mark now.
Well, before Mark comes, I just want to reiterate to people that we will be sending the slides out to everyone, and that with all the information, plus also, like Rebecca's referred to, all the joining instructions for the trauma-informed training and the parenting courses. And I can say, parent myself to a teenager, I've done Understanding Your Teenager, and I can recommend it. It's given me a tremendous insight into my child, but also how I might react to certain behaviours and it not being helpful as a parent. So it's been great to do that course, so well recommended. So yeah, I would like to hand you over to Mark Finnis, who we've been working with for a number of years around relationship-based approach, and it follows up nicely from Rebecca around the importance of relationship, always important, but especially now in light of everything that happened. So Mark, over to you. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all okay at home. Just as an introduction, really, is my name's Mark Finnis, and thanks for the invite along today. I've been involved in restorative practice for about 20 years now across schools, children's services, some adult services, and across communities. What I will say is we've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to introduce you to some of the key principles. Hopefully, you can take some of them away. I'm going to share some brief phrases with you, so you might want to jot them down, capture them, reflect on them later on. And also, as you might already know, some of the slides and resources will be available to you afterwards. So if you could just click to my first slide, that'd be wonderful, please. Thank you. So the first bit I'm going to talk to you about is all about the importance of relationships. The second part of the session is looking at a model called the social discipline window of high challenge, high support. And the third part of the session, we're going to look at a little bit on restorative language. So I would hope for you guys listening is that relationships are nothing new. We would hope that schools across children's services, relationship-based practice is something we think about every single day, never mind during COVID, but all of the times. But for me personally, I think we need to make relationships much more explicit versus implicit. And we need to put a real strong focus on the building and maintaining of relationships. I also think we need to spend time looking to repair relationships when relationships break down. And I even think if you separate that repairing word out to repair, it means to me that we must look to repair once we come back from COVID, back to schools, back to classrooms, back to face-to-face for family support and social workers and so on. The bit about building relationships for me is that we must, for me, I think about the word social capital. If you imagine a relationship bank between you and somebody else, we must look to build and invest lots of deposit into that relationship bank. A phrase I'd love you to think about is know our children well and know our families well, but also allow them to know us well. If we're going to invest in the relationship bank, we must move ourselves from being just professionals to also being humans, our human side. So to keep us safe, though, we talk about 3 Ps, personal, private, and professional. You have to give a little bit of yourself, but we're not asking anybody to share anything private. But I'll happily share with people. I've got 5 children. I've got a dog called Dexter, a cat called Alan. I mean, if anyone listening to me at the moment's working from home, you might have some children that you don't like very much at the moment. I've got 5. I've definitely got 1 I'd swap for a new Apple product. I don't know about anybody else. I've definitely, if you're sitting at home, have you got a least favourite or a most favourite at the moment? I can see a couple of people smiling there. That means it's them. Just in case you're about to put a referral in for me, I'm only joking. You know, I dislike all my children the same. But on a serious note, is that bit about sharing a little bit of yourself. I can see Isabel's face, by the way. But in terms of giving a little bit of yourself, I'll happily talk about my 5 children that I absolutely love to bits. I'll tell you the names. I'll tell you my dog's name. I'll tell you about Everton. But I won't give out my personal address. I won't talk about private things. I won't talk about those things. But you have to give a little bit of yourself. Because for us, if you move me on to the next slide, that'd be wonderful. What we're trying to do. Thank you. And if you just put the 3 points up, that'd be wonderful. What I'm talking about there about giving a little bit of yourself is the importance of connecting with other people, finding common ground. And if you don't give much of yourself, it's really tough to start to build those connections. And a little phrase I'd love you to think about again is connect before content. We want to spend a huge time and focus before we even get into a lesson delivery, before we get into a meeting, an assessment, a phone call, a Skype meeting, using WhatsApp or whichever. Spend a little bit of time just connecting with people. I haven't shared that I've got 5 children by accident. I want you to know a little bit more about me. The key bit for us about developing that really strong connection is we're not asking in relationship-based practice to do things 100% better. I'd love you to think about doing 100 things 1% better. What are the marginal gains? You know, so in terms of those parts. Just before we move on to the other 2 points, I also think another phrase for you to consider is the language we use creates the reality we experience. I think sometimes the language we use drives disconnection rather than connection with the people we work with. And in case you're thinking, oh, what does he mean by that? I think, do you ever hear phrases like hard to reach or difficult to engage? I think we should ban those 2 phrases because they blame the child or the family. Let's reframe it to, I've been unable to build a relationship with the child yet. I used to work in primary and secondary schools. I've worked in 2 pupil referral units, but we started to change the language from challenging behaviour to distressed behaviour. In a word, we flipped the narrative to focus on empathy, listening and understanding, rather than a punitive or authoritarian approach to manage challenging behaviour. When I worked in schools, we moved our behaviour management policy away to become a relationship policy to enhance learning and achievement. It moved the focus somewhere else. Foster and adoption children are on placements. They're in families' homes. You know, I love an abbreviation for a sandwich. I love a BLT, but I really struggle with lack children. You know, labels belong on jars. They don't belong on children. You know, in terms of some of this stuff, you know, stuff around special educational needs and disabilities, if we're not careful, we see it as a deficit model rather than a gifts. I love the reframe at the Invictus Games where one of the gentlemen was competing and he was doing a talk afterwards and he said he hasn't got a disability, he's got a different ability. And I think there's some reframing to do so that we connect with our children and families and also our staff. That way we create that strong sense of belonging and we develop that real sense of community. And I don't think this is about the big stuff. I think it's about the small stuff becomes the big stuff. Small ripples create big waves at the moment. People don't want the world. You know, and thinking about school context, when your children come back to school, whenever that is and whenever it's safe for everybody, you know, some children will be coming back to school to learn. Other children will be coming back to school to be loved. And it's that reframe around some of that stuff. For me, if you move on to the next slide, that would be wonderful. I have to stop myself on that bit. There's so much more I want to talk about. If you could just put all of the points up on that slide, that would be absolutely brilliant. Save me bothering you over again and just put my phone back on so I can keep an eye on time. If you haven't seen this before, and some people have, because obviously we've done some training in Walsall and we've done an education event, but this is actually the references on the bottom, but we call this the social discipline window is the true name, but we call it 4 ways of being. You can overlay this parenting styles, care styles, you can overlay it leadership, you can overlay it education, social work, family support, health. You'll notice there's 2 axes, one of challenge and one of support. The one of challenge going from low to high. We mean words like underneath the word challenge, we mean words like to set limits, to set rules, boundaries, expectations, a clear bottom line, a danger statement. When we say support, we mean words like nurture, encouragement, compassion, empathy, listening. This is not about packages of support on that axis. And if you put different variables of both, it will take you to those 4 different practice styles. If we can start with the top left one, the 2 box. This is the style of practice of somebody who's high on challenge, but really low on support. And even just sitting at home, if you were looking through that window, what type of words would you use to describe that style of practice? And I know you can't talk back to me, but rather than be a passenger in the session, I'm just going to get you to think a little bit. When we do this on trainings, courses with children, with families, communities, they come up with words like they feel done to. You know, professionals talk about punitive, authoritarian, one of those I can't spell. We also talk about being controlling. Really sensitive words that children talk about is they feel bullied. They feel scared. So doing 2 is actually a really powerful box. The 4 box, as you'll also see across the axes, is the opposite. It's really high on support, but really low on challenge. So there's lots of nurture, encouragement, compassion and empathy, but there's no rules or boundaries. As you can see, the word we've got to describe that style of practice is the 4 box. But again, if you just have a bit of reflection, if you were looking through that box, what words would you use? Words on courses we get are words like permissive, rescuing, making excuses for people's behaviours. Children often say, well, when they're around adults in schools, communities, they often feel unsafe. There's no rules, feels chaotic. But we call that the 4 box. Now, the reason I've started with those 2 is I think they're the box we default to the most when things aren't going our way. If I go to the bottom left, this is where there's low challenge, low support. We call this the not box. But again, if you were looking through that window, what words would you use to describe that style of practice? You know, on courses, people use words like neglectful, dangerous, not interested. Children certainly say not interested, doesn't ask us anything, doesn't show us any interest, doesn't talk to us. The reason we put that in red is I don't think there's ever a time you'd be in that box, but I do think there's occasions when we do need to do 2 to keep children safe, to keep our staff safe, to be directive on occasions. We also think there's times when people will need a lot of things done for them, especially during COVID. People are going to need much more nurture, compassion, empathy, listening to than ever before. The last box really is where there's high challenge, high support. As you can see already, we call that the with box. But if you were looking behind that and you were thinking about what words would you use to describe that practice, words we get on courses are collaborative, relational, they're interested in me, they show up. To be really honest though, also words we get is they're tough, they don't let us off with anything. Children sometimes say they're tough, they remind us what's important, they're interested in us, they inspire us, we remember them. We call that the with box. The word I would pull this together before I do the last slide is the with box is no lesser the authority though. People get that confused in restorative practice because we talk a lot about relationships and we talk about words like nurture, encouragement, compassion and empathy. That means that we get soft. That's not what restorative is about. Restorative practice is no lesser the authority. The key phrase is it's how we exercise that authority in a way that does things with people rather than to them or for them. So hopefully you're okay on that. The last slide, if you put me on, just with about 3 or 4 minutes to go. I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on this. And again, on a full training, we would explain there's a lot more slides and questions that go with each 3 bubbles. You know, just in terms of a resource that you can access following the session, we have little PDFs available with the structure much broader. But if you look at those 3 bubbles, you can use these when relationships break down. You know, if you want a relational repair, this gives you a lovely structure to be able to repair some of those relationships. You know, earlier colleagues were talking about conflict in families, conflict in schools, conflict anywhere. You can use these 3 bubbles to repair people. Bubble 1, you'll notice it's got the question, what happened? This is not a script. It could be what's led us up to being here today. Over the last couple of days, what's been happening. What you will notice is it's not the why question. The why question builds brick walls rather than open up windows of opportunity. It slams the door shut. The why question is also high functioning. Not many people can comprehend why they've done something. And if you've ever asked a child why they've done something, I'm quite sure you can remember the shrug of the shoulders, the tuts, I don't know, because. So a little phrase to take away is change why to what. Such a simple sidestep in communication. Also in that bubble though, we want to acknowledge that there's always more than one perspective. We always say there's always at least 3 truths in any situation. My truth, your truth, and the truth. Bubble 1 will also include thinking and feeling questions, because if you express it, you feel it, and if you feel it, you're more ready to move forward. So bubble 2, building on bubble 1, is all about exploring who's been affected and how. If you drop a pebble in the pond, what happens? The ripples go out much further. So who else was affected? Who else did that impact upon? Again, if you're working with a 7 or 8-year-old child, would you ask them who's been affected? Maybe not, because it's not a script. You can change it. How were others feeling? When that happened, how did it leave your mum feeling? If you're in a classroom context, when that happened, how did it leave child X feeling? So you can use different language to draw that out. The key bit is, though, for bubble 3, if you're not picking up on it already, we want to move things from the past to the present in bubble 2, but onto bubble 3 to the future. Less time on the problem, more time on the solution. So bubble 3 is asking people to consider what needs have happened in terms of what we described in bubble 1, but more important, what needs to happen next for things to start to move forward. Again, it's not a script. It could be specifically, what would you need from mum for things to move forward? It could be, you know, 2 children in the classroom and they're back in school with you. What do you need from each other for things to move forward? The key bit on there is we want to focus on solutions rather than problems. The bit I will just highlight, and it's a phrase I often think about, if you're not careful, sometimes some people have a problem for every solution. It doesn't matter what you come up with in bubble 3. No, we couldn't do that. No, that's not possible. This is one about gifts rather than deficits, possibilities, the future in terms of some of those things. And just in the last 20 seconds or so, I think some things for us to think about is I think culture exists in every organisation, in every school, but is yours by design or is it by default? I think about, as a parent in our house, culture exists in my home. A couple of other bits in there is, let's catch people getting it right more than we catch people getting it wrong. Focus on people's strengths rather than their weaknesses. And just to sum it up, really, is that if you're not modelling what you're teaching at the moment, you're teaching something different. So this is about what we model to what we expect. And I think my 15 minutes is up, really. There's lots more we could tell you, but hopefully I've dipped your toe in the water a little bit. If you want to know anything more, connect with us. Other than that, thank you for listening. Thank you for having me with you.
Thank you, Mark. And I think from the comments in the question and answer box, people could listen to you all afternoon, and you can do. Mark is with us as a partner in Walsall. He has delivered lots of training within children's services. We have a partnership with Mark to extend that out to schools. We've been talking about it to schools for a long time. Some of the issues around lockdown and COVID-19 have halted that a bit, but we're ready to open those communications. So at the end of today's session, you will see some contact details about how you can get in touch with us, and we'll get the ball rolling on that. So please, if you've got any questions either for Mark or Rebecca so far, publish them and I'll pick them up at the end of the session. So for the last bit of the session, I would like to hand over to Emma and Julie, who will be reflecting on the, kind of what we're doing in Walsall to start thinking about post-lockdown and the support and the working together with partners that will be available. So Emma, welcome.
Thank you. Hi everybody. So for those of you who don't know me, Emma Thornberry, lead educational psychologist, and I've been working in Walsall for a little while. So it's just to quickly discuss a few key bits really over the next couple of slides, and then I'll be handing over to Julie, who'll talk about the Time to Talk early help offer. So just some reminders for us really, and like Mark and Rebecca have said, a lot of this isn't about rocket science or changing the world or introducing big new concepts to people. It's just reminding us at a time of stress and challenge about the basic things that we usually do that we need to really focus on right now. So in the slide after this, we'll look at these bits in a little bit more detail, but we're thinking about how we're managing the current situation now, how we help people transition towards that new normal, as people have started to talk about, and then that adjustment period following the initial transition as we get used to how things are post-COVID, as starts of life start to resume a bit more fully, and then moving into the longer term future and how people are adjusting to that. And then that's really at the point where we're looking at identifying people who may have more significant needs and are finding things more challenging and are having more difficulty adjusting, that might need that more specialist support. So if we just have a look at the next slide, please. And I know Isabel said, so these slides are coming out to everybody, so I know this print is a bit small, but we'll just be talking about a few of the key points on here. So as you've said, just in case you didn't catch it, this is about relationships and relationships and relationships. So it's thinking creatively, really, and we've seen a lot of ideas that have been shared from our schools and other services about how we can really strengthen relationships at this time of remote working and social distancing. And one of the concepts around holding children or people in mind. So that's the idea of, although we're not physically with people, we need to think about how they can be held in mind. I experience this regularly with my own young children. So when I'm locking myself away in the dining room to work, needing to leave objects of mine with them so that they're knowing that I'm remembering them when I'm switching into work mode. And we can do that with the children and families that we're supporting. So those little things that keep that relationship going when we're not physically with somebody, to reassure them. And a real reminder to us, I think sometimes we can get trapped in a little bit of a feeling that as professionals and people that are supporting children and families, it's our job to be okay and to be strong and to contain things for everybody else. But we need to remember that we're human too. So we need to make sure we're taking time to reflect, doing the activities that support us to feel more okay and to manage things when things are really difficult. So we are human, you need the support too, and we need to reflect on that at all levels. As we're working towards the transition phase, I think it can be helpful to look at chunks of time. So where possible, although we get quite sudden changes and short-term periods to change things in response to government guidance and announcements, it's trying to have that planned small stepped approach. So moving from one period of adapted routine to the next, so that we're helping people to move along with us. And we know ourselves that to help us adjust to changes, knowledge is power, and it helps us to understand why changes are being made and why we need to do certain things now. So particularly thinking about some of our children and families who will be returning to work or returning to school, it's helping them understand what changes we need to make and what things will look like from now. In terms of that longer adjustment period, I think something we talk about in psychology a lot is around ecosystem approach. So one of the visuals we often use is around an onion and the layers of an onion, and peeling those back. So we need to think not just focusing about individual children and their families, but also thinking about the other wider systems that are around them. Thinking about how we're supporting staff and leaders in schools and other organisations, and taking that trauma-informed approach across the whole system. And finally, one of the other key points to point out in terms of the long term, we need to remember that usually what we hear from people, and we've probably recognise this in ourselves as well, that it's the people that we're closest to and have trusting relationships that we usually turn to at times of stress and challenge. And they're the people that we want to be talking to and opening up to. So that often leads people who are working in schools and community-based services as being the key point of contact for people to go to. And something that we often hear from schools in my service is about a concern that they don't have the right or specialist skills to be able to respond in these kind of situations. While we recognise it can be quite daunting, and we need to make sure you're supported in doing that, it often is you that is best placed to be providing that responsive support to children and families. So what we need to hear from you as services and specialist services of what help and support you need to be able to do that well. So, you know, on an ongoing basis, not just through this session, but afterwards, we want to be having a lot of feedback from schools, partners, services, organisations about what we can be doing to help you. When we're moving further down the line and we have concerns about individuals or families and them finding it difficult to adjust, I think another model that's helpful to keep in mind is a model of mental health, understanding mental health difficulties, which is the power threat meaning framework. So that's developed by some psychologists, and the key messages sit with what you've already heard. So this is about asking people what has happened to them, what's their experience, what's their story that's leading them to this point of difficulty, and about what mechanisms and actions, strategies they've had to put into place to survive that difficulty. So rather than labelling people with mental health illnesses or disorders, it's about looking at that what can be quite a normal, starting as a very normal response to a difficult situation. And it's when people aren't responding to the community-based support over a period of time that we might need to think about getting some more specialist support for them. But in this phase, it's very much about how we specialist services can be supporting the people who are working with children and families day in, day out on a regular basis. So we do want to hear from you about what support we can offer. And I know Isabel will talk a little bit at the end about the support and actions that are going on for our schools, as well as our other services and partners. So you'll hear about that at the end. But if I pass over to Julie Jones now, just to talk a bit more about the Time to Talk early help offer.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Okay, so just moving on from that, so how are we planning? How are we preparing that we're emotionally available to support each other, to support our families, our children, our young people? And how are we going to create that framework really for building those relationships? As we've heard, it's all about the relationships that we have with each other and support that we give to each other. So from a practitioner's point of view in early help, we're absolutely taking the opportunities to provide as much training as that we can through this time, training that Rebecca has alluded to, for example. We're capturing the learning to inform the practice. So as we said earlier on, it's not all been negative. There are some absolutely positive ways of working that have come out, and we do not want to go back to those old ways. So we're involving practitioners to share that with us, giving us the opportunities to be involved in the planning that we want to do post lockdown, but equally to give practical and emotional support. And that's a common thread really for practitioners, for parents, for each other, for children and young people. For our parents, it's really important to go back to some of the basics. It's to give them the time to reflect, the time to talk, the opportunity to say how they're feeling, but it's about being informed, being clear with them, providing clear advice, working with them, alleviating any concerns that they've got, and really understanding those concerns and the impact that's having on them as a family. Encouraging still to go and have that fun. You know, so many families have said that this has provided that opportunity for them. And again, as I've said, that practical and emotional support. Our children and young people, it's been an interesting sort of consultation that we're doing and continue to do around the children and young people. And again, it's you know, time to talk, going back to that basics, giving that time, but also talking to them about the transition back into school, how they're feeling about that, how can we support about that, how they can plan around that, how they can keep connected with some of their friends and their wider social networks, about getting back into a routine. We absolutely know for our older teenagers that's going to be critical for them, and how they can put in some of those strategies around coping and those coping mechanisms, and as I've said, a practical and emotional support, the common theme throughout. The next slide, please, Kerry. So our Time to Talk planning. We are planning some locality drop-in sessions. Obviously, we would normally be in our locality hubs where we have lots of agencies, lots of partners, as well as children, young people and families that come in. So we're planning some virtual drop-in sessions around them, and we will be giving you a little bit more information over the next couple of weeks with that. Jennifer Meller, our locality coordinator, is leading on that, and I suppose it's a bit of a new take on our old locality panels. As many of you'll know, we've been doing a big piece of work about reviewing them, and this is to start that process off again with a real focus on post lockdown and how we can support each other with that. And for our early help school inclusion and wellbeing team, they would normally be, for those of you that are in schools, they would normally be visual within the schools during this time. We know that we're not, obviously, we're trying to be in contact as much as we can, but from next Tuesday, each of the locality areas and the school inclusion leads are going to be offering some informal but virtual catch-up sessions for our school partners. It's around, again, opportunity. We're happy to coordinate that, but it's about opportunities to build on our relationship, share our experiences and share with us what's worrying, and collectively come up with some solutions that we can address getting ready for our post-lockdown. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass you over to Isabel, and I do hope that you'll join us on those sessions.
Thank you. Thank you. This is the last bit. Apologies for going over, but we felt it was really important not to rush anything. There aren't many questions, but I do want to reflect on, before I kind of finish off with a couple more slides and information, useful information for people. I want to share, hopefully people will have seen the questions and answers, but I'm just trying to find it now. Somebody shared an example of an example of a pupil at school where people had been talking about vulnerable children in school, and a child came up to one of the children and said, Miss, am I a valuable child? And actually that's a really good reflection of a child overhearing something and then interpreting it different, but it makes a point that vulnerable children are our valuable children, and agree that maybe we shouldn't label them or change the labels that we have into a more positive sense. So that was a lovely example that shared, and lots of people are saying the stuff we talked about the language and the relationship has been really useful and timely. And just in terms of my last slides then, kind of saying I'm hoping that today has been really a sense of Walsall Right for Children in this time is about working together, and for us to connect together to provide the right help and support. It's not about us asking schools to do certain things or children's services to do certain things or the voluntary sector. It's about what, you know, how can we connect to those children who and families who have really have found this difficult. How can we support our workforce who have experienced some really difficult times and connect together? So my call for action really as a last point is around, you know, what is the joint practice that we have that we can share, and what training have we had, what formal training have we had that we can reflect on now, or what are the gaps in our training that we can, you know, use the next couple of weeks to develop that gap in that training. And all of the stuff that we talked about today, from the Solihull approach to the restorative practice, our offer of support and help that is available. So how do we kind of move that forward, so we're moving forward together and having one joint way of practicing. The second call for action would be, is there anything within our organisation that we need to change, that we need to review in not going back to our old way of working? Are there policies and procedures that stops us from giving the right help and support? And within children's services, that means that we will have to reflect on our referral mechanisms and avoiding any delay and kind of waiting lists, which is why Julie is introducing the time to talk to start identifying the solution and get the right help as quickly as possible to children. But what policies around behaviour or referral pathways do we need to review in light of COVID-19 and the social distancing? And even as a practitioner, you know, you may say policies are not within my area, but if you find them that they are obstructive, you know, we all have a responsibility to find a way of challenging that and ask the right questions. And then the last one is we've given lots of opportunities, hopefully today, to start thinking about who we need to connect to, not just the families we are working with, but the practitioners in our localities, and how we can work together, have the right conversation and share some good practice. We don't have to do it all by ourselves, we have to work together. And although this is a difficult time, there are still creative ways that people have been working, connecting with families and providing help and support, and let's join them up, and we'll make a difference coming out of lockdown. Last couple of slides, key contact details then for key people you can start connecting with. So Early Help Hub, most people will know about this, but this is where you can go for more information about locality time to talk sessions, parenting programs, understanding trauma course, or go on our website. After today, you will get with the slides all the information about all of the parenting courses and the trauma informed courses that's available, how to log on. If you have any questions about it or you're having trouble to log on, give us an email or give us a ring. Emma talked about the education psychology core offer that is there now in terms of direct offer to children and families, talking around anxiety, around behaviour, or around integrating back to school. The West Midlands Violence Reduction Unit has created a whole toolkit around trauma-informed practice, very visual toolkit and a very reflective toolkit focused on young people and violent behaviour. So it has got a specific angle to it, but that's available using that website. And then Julie has mentioned Jennifer Meller, our locality panel coordinator. That's her contact details there. The last slide I have, and I promise it is the last slide, is our support to schools and our key contacts for schools. So we've got Julie Jones, who's our key lead on restorative practice training. We don't want to delay getting restorative practice training going, because we know that social distancing will be here to remain. So we're thinking in a creative way how we can use mediums like this and team Office 365 team Zoom sessions to do training with practitioners, and Mark and his team have done some fantastic work already in designing packages of support, and we'll be working with Mark to see how we can make that available to schools. So if you are interested, if you want your staff to be trained, get in touch with Julie and we could start thinking about that. Trudy Pryor is taking the lead on developing a coordinated package of support around trauma-informed practice, so that will be coming out to schools. But if you want her to consider anything in particular, her contact details are there as well. And then as well as the time to talk locality sessions, the Early Help Inclusion officers are doing a particular time to talk session for schools. So if you've got any children, any families in particular you want to talk about around being valuable, not vulnerable, then get in contact with your locality inclusion officer and join them on a weekly meeting on a Tuesday from 2 o'clock for an hour, and we can talk about individual packages of support for children, either integrating them into school or actually providing the right help now while they're still at home. So hopefully that's some useful information. And hopefully you have enjoyed that. I'm just going to double check before we say goodbye that there aren't any particular issues coming up. Okay.
Can I just add, sorry, Isabel, I've just seen a question come through around training on bereavement. So just to flag up, I did put a post, but the EP service will be delivering virtual training on loss and bereavement for school staff on a weekly basis this term, so starting next week. And there'll also be a standalone guidance that we'll share.
Okay, and how do people, will that directly go to head teachers, or how will the information be shared on that?
Yeah, flyers will go out via our Senko email list, our Senko Teams area, and through school postbox email addresses. So if you don't hear about it by next Monday, come back to me and I'll make sure you get the flyer.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. So before I leave, Lorna has just posted the link to our evaluation session. So please, can I ask you, before you leave today, click on the link there. Take 2 minutes to complete an evaluation. It really helps us to inform our next webinar. We want to do more of these. We want to make sure that the topic is helpful to practitioners or organisations there. We want to make sure that, you know, the format of it is valuable to you. So please, your your opinions, your views are really taken into consideration to plan the next one. So please, if you can take some time, 2 minutes for that, that'd be great. And we will send out the information from today directly after this website. We have recorded this, so it will be available for re-listening, but it will take us a week to upload it onto the Safeguarding Partnership website. So it will take a bit of time. When it's available, we will send out the link to you. So without further ado, I would like to thank our panel today for sharing some really valuable knowledge, experience with us to start our thinking of how we can provide that right support to children, young people and families, and start those connections happening, and hopefully people will find that information useful and will start acting on it. So before I say, I've just seen Emma's contact details will be on the slide, which we will send out directly after this this session. So thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your Wednesday midweek, and I'm hoping to see you all soon for the next webinar, or maybe even face-to-face for some further planning. So thank you all. Speak to you soon. Bye.